Welcome, everyone. My name is Tristan Claridge, and I'm the convener of this webinar series for the International Social Capital Association. The association's mission is to advance the research and application of the social capital concept, and the association is going from strength to strength at the moment. We've got lots of members, and we're going to hold our first international conference in Dubai next year. In this session, we welcome Dr. John Crowley for a presentation titled Social Capital in Action, a Blueprint for Petaluma's Civic Engagements. John is a dedicated community builder based in Petaluma in California, and he's the founder of Aqus Café, a nationally recognized third space and cultural hub, and executive director of the Aqus Community Foundation. He also co-founded Cool Petaluma, a citywide initiative that blends climate resilience with social connection. With a background in computer science and a passion for with a passion for fostering meaningful connections, John has been instrumental in creating spaces and initiatives that strengthen community ties. His efforts have earned him Petaluma's highest civic honour, the Good Egg Award, for his contributions to local engagement through events, gatherings, and civic initiatives. We're really delighted you've agreed to give this webinar, John. Welcome, and over to you for the presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Tristan. I'm really honored to be here speaking with you all today. And I'm going to go over quite a few of the community building initiatives and programs that I've been developing over the past 25 years. But before I do that, I want to tell you a little bit about my background and where I came from and some of the things that were the driving forces in some of the things that I've been doing. So I was born in Dublin, Ireland, South County Dublin, in a village, basically a suburb of Dublin, and I come from a family of publicans. Now, publicans are people who run pubs or public houses, and I'll be referring to pubs throughout this presentation. And when I'm talking about pubs, I mean that kind of public houses in Ireland that have got a traditional, the commons, basically a gathering space. And so as a teenager from the age of 12 to 22 when I left Ireland, I worked in my family business, and what I saw there had a profound influence on my life. The pub was, our family pub was truly a third space, a place for teachers and builders and business owners and all sorts of people just gathering under one roof and creating a real sense of community. So, back then in Ireland, there were kind of two community hubs, I guess, the church and the pub, and luckily I grew up in the latter. And later I pursued a degree in computer science, and my first job was in Germany, where I spent about 6 or 7 years developing reservations for airlines and train systems. And eventually I emigrated to the United States and where I still live in Petaluma, California. It's a town of about 60 people, where I continued my career in software development. But there was always kind of something niggling in the back of my mind, a feeling that something was missing. So in Ireland, if you move community, the first thing you do is you go down to the local pub and you'll meet everybody there. You know, the city councillors are there, the bricklayers, the teachers, everybody is there, and that's where you meet everybody. In fact, that's where you might even meet your neighbors. But when I came to the United States, now the United States has got great bars and restaurants, but I couldn't find that place, that community space, that third space. I couldn't find that in the United States. You know, the kind of place that I'd be quite comfortable bringing my kids to and my grandparents to at the same time. And so that was kind of, I realized there was something lacking in there. And so it also kind of struck me as when I moved to Germany and also when I moved to the United States, I found it challenging to create a friend group. And generally speaking, you know, most of our friends are through our place of work or our place of worship or even through our kids. And so when I came to the United States first, we didn't have kids, didn't go to church, and I worked with a couple of other computer programmers. So the idea of or the issue of kind of creating a friend group was very personal to me, and it inspired me to do something about it. Now today, as Tristan mentioned, I run a vibrant community cafe and an executive director of a nonprofit. Both of these organizations, they're uh, mission is to bring people together in both kind of old-fashioned ways and in some cases quite new and inventive ways. And I'll be going over quite a lot of these in the talk right now. Um, so there's about 25 years ago, a couple of things happened to me. I remember reading Robert Putnam's book, Bowling Alone, and thinking about the social capital in America, and was kind of wondering, well, uh, we saw the demise of social capital, and I was kind of thought, well, what is my role going to be? How do I affect my local social capital? And then I remember one night I was home alone. My wife and kids were away at the time on vacation, and I was sitting at home alone in front of the television, channel surfing, and bored out of my mind. And I was wondering how many other people, similar to me, I think I was about 32 at the time, and I was wondering how many other people in Petaluma, maybe even living around the corner, were doing exactly the same thing. Channel surfing, watching television, bored, wanting to have a conversation. So I decided to do something that evening. And so I sent out quite a few emails to some friends of mine and said, well, why don't we meet in Volpe's, which is a wonderful speakeasy here in town. Let's meet in Volpe's next Saturday at 8 o'clock. And then we'll go at 9 o'clock, we'll go to Graziano's. And then at 10 o'clock, we'll go someplace else. And to my delight, 12 people showed up. I didn't know all of them, but soon got to know who they were. And we had such a great time that we decided to make a regular thing out of this. And so over the next few years, actually, this idea quickly kind of developed into an event that happened every 2 months. I'd send an itinerary out, and people would save the date. And the focus really was never about drinking. It was about connecting with people. And we always had a theme on these gatherings to mainly kind of help a conversation start. And some of these themes were frivolous. They were, bring the last postcard you've received, or bring a photograph of yourself as a teenager, something to start a conversation. And it was fun. But my personal favorite, and one that I used most frequently, was bring a book that changed your life. Now, when we share something personal, it's a great way to get to know somebody. And, if I tell you about the book that changed my life, you'll very quickly know if you want to have another conversation with me. And so that was just a great way of getting to know people in your community. And there was amazing kind of things happened on these crawls. I remember overhearing two gentlemen chatting, and they were looking at each other, trying to figuring out, well, do I recognize you? And it turned out that they were neighbors. Now they were back-to-back neighbors, but it was interesting. It took them coming out on this community crawl for them to start a conversation. And so over the while, people kind of realized by coming to these events and starting these conversations that they lived on the same street, their kids went to the same school, or they had the shared similar hobbies. And it really became a town tradition that ran for actually nearly a decade. Now, partially this was inspired by an old Irish tradition called Wren Day. And this is something that happens the day after Christmas, where you'd go visiting from house to house, and you'd go to the O'Malley's at 11 o'clock, and then you go to the O'Shea's at 12 o'clock, and you'd have a cup of tea. And then as the day wore on, you'd kind of be switching over to Guinness and maybe whiskey, and you'd end up in a pub or a barn dance at the end of the evening. But it was all about conversation and joy and really the community spirit. And so it was interesting that people don't often say, you rarely see people put their hand up and say, I need to form a friend group. But that's exactly what we were doing during those crawls. And some of those friendships have lasted 25 years. And it was a wonderful way to use public spaces. The crawl was one experiment really in kind of weaving the social fabric through joy, playfulness, and a little intentional design. Let me share another story with you about something that an old institution that had almost faded away. This was just there's a photograph of myself holding me looking a little bit younger, holding that photograph of myself as a teenager. It was really just something to start a conversation, and it really worked very well. They generally they were kind of about 100 to 200 people roving around. It took a lot of organization to get them going. And then one of these places that we actually visited was something called the Petaluma Moose Lodge. Now, the Moose Lodge, about 20 years ago, was in decline. It was tired. The building was felt tired. The energy was gone, and like many of these lodges across the United States, kind of felt like a little bit of a relic of the past, times gone by. But I saw something different. Actually, my first time in the Moose Lodge was when I visited. I was invited for a friend's birthday party, and I remember striking up a conversation with one of the older members. He was a retired peace officer, and he shared the history of the Moose Lodges and how they thrived really by focusing on social and financial support for their members and their families. Back in the 1880s, when it first started, there was no social safety net. So a group of steel workers in Philadelphia actually got together and formed these lodges across the country to provide meeting halls and restaurants and bars, and more important, or most importantly, a social safety net for their members. This was truly an honorable venture. But maybe their time had passed with the government providing social safety nets and sick pay and things like that. Really, the original mission of the Moose Lodge, seemingly had passed by. But I do remember that night that retired police officer, he was telling me that this is really a place where neighbors became friends. And what he was describing was how social capital was being created. So that conversation resonated with me, and I actually envisioned the lodge not as a dusty kind of place for retirees, but really as a vibrant center for community life. So next day, I went back and I joined the Moose Lodge. And I started inviting my friends and family and encouraging them to join and create a place that we all wanted to be part of. It wasn't long before I became the governor of the Moose Lodge and led the revitalization by changing the activities and the energy that happened in the place. So we introduced open mic nights and foreign film screenings and conversation cafes and drum circles, and we even had a sustainable investment group. The space during that time transformed from empty tables to a room filled with laughter, music, and connection. And during my tenure, actually fairly soon on, we became the fastest growing Moose Lodge in the United States. And that was for 2 years in a row. They actually even invited me back to give the keynote address to the Moose convention in Reno, basically kind of how do you revitalize your lodge. Um, And so the lesson actually became clear to me that we don't need to change the core values of the moose. They were absolutely fine. We just have to change and update what happened inside the lodge. Today, people, especially younger generation, are looking for connection. They're looking for a sense of purpose. And if you offer that, people will show up. In the end, what we created wasn't just a calendar of events. It was a network of people who genuinely knew each other, people who kind of knew each other, connected, had conversations. And what that Moose Lodge experience taught me that institutions do not have to fade away. We might have to change what happens inside and meet people where they are and offer them really a new place to belong. So now, while all this was happening, I was still working as a software developer, and as luck would have it, the coffee shop right beside me, the coffee shop that I had attended and bought coffee at for the previous 10 or 12 years, it became available. And so this gave me a wonderful opportunity to put my ideas about building community into practice. I opened this cafe. We called it Aqus Café. Now, obviously I'm not head of marketing. It's not even a word. Why would I create a cafe that nobody can spell or pronounce? But there was an intention behind it. What I wanted to do was create meaning for the word by having the events and activities and the feeling inside the cafe basically put meaning into that word. Whenever you open a new business, most businesses they take a name from that are previously used, and I didn't want something with maybe had some baggage attending or baggage on the name. So, but the vision was pretty clear. What I wanted to create was a combining a warm, friendly atmosphere of an Irish pub together with the informality of a Californian coffee shop. And from the beginning, it wasn't really about the coffee or the food. It was about fostering conversation, connection, and community. We designed the space around the culture of a single idea that conversations create relationships and relationships build communities. We borrowed our tagline from W.B. Yeats, who said, there are no strangers here, only friends you haven't met yet. And that line still greets you at the door, and it's been our compass ever since. So, in the early days, local press described the cafe as a shared community living room, a hub where artists, teachers, neighbors naturally collided. And we hosted everything from spoken word poetry to music to knitting circles, spiritual book groups, science talks, and salons. Aquas has always been and still is a place where you don't just drink your coffee. You stay, you talk, you meet with somebody, and you connect. And over the years, dozens of writers have written about Aquas Cafe as a place where things begin. New friendships, new collaborations, new civic ideas. It's where you find your hiking partner, your next roommate, your future business partner, or even your life partner. Or maybe it's just somebody to share a cup of coffee with. So now, while Aquas Cafe was becoming a vibrant third space, we saw that something deeper was needed, a way to bring people together in community conversations. We needed a space for dialogue, trust building, and mutual understanding across political, generational, and cultural divides. The cafe had its limits, and so 10 years ago we started something called Aqus Community Foundation. It's a 501c3 nonprofit created to do something not even the most welcoming cafe could do. The mission, similar to Aquas Cafe, is to create social capital, to connect people at a human level, to create a more vibrant, trusting, and connected society. So when I talk about the work I do, I first explain kind of my interpretation of social capital. And for me, it's the value of the trusted relationships between individuals and organizations within a community. But how does one build that? Um, and how do you get people to trust each other? And for me, I kind of thought that it really starts with a conversation and the building of a relationship. And that's why so much of our work that we do is focused on facilitating environments and events where conversations can easily start. One of the most important projects we focused on was something we called Petaluma Conversations. So about 8 years ago, we had a very controversial art piece that was proposed in Petaluma. It's featured five oversized, huge bathtubs on stilts, about 40 feet high, whimsical and kind of like Dr. Seuss kind of style. And it completely divided the community in two. And I saw, online on Facebook and Nextdoor and other forums, I saw friends of mine being pretty horrible to other friends of mine. And then in turn, I saw those friends being pretty horrible back. It was actually quite painful to see people acting like this. These were people that I knew and loved and trusted. And so we decided one evening, we closed the cafe one evening, and I handpicked 30 of these people from these various online communities, Nextdoor, Facebook, and others, and invited them to sit around a table in the cafe. Most of them had never met in person. Many of them had actually met online, and they trolled and sparred with each other online. And we facilitated the evening by a friend of mine helped me do this because he runs something called empathy circles. Now, we decided not to call the evening a gathering for empathy circles because I don't think anybody would have showed up. But anyway, we grouped them six at a table, three for the art piece and three against. And the process involves reflective listening. So one person starts and speaks to the other person, and that person reflects back to them what they think they heard them say. And that actually kind of goes back and forth until both parties are in agreement that that's how one feels about, in this case, about the art piece. But by the end of the evening, something had shifted. And I remember two friends of mine, as they stood up to leave, they shook hands, looked at each other, and one of them said to the other, "You're a lot nicer in person than you are online." And it was true. And it was quite interesting to see how I think the tenor of the conversation online was affected by this. Um, and it's kind of like, well, why? I mean, well, it's obviously, once you know who's behind an online comment, once you feel that connection with somebody, there's respect, and we act differently. So that was the genesis of Petaluma Conversations, and we realized that it was worth continuing. We don't do it at the cafe anymore. We do it at the Petaluma Public Library, and we've been running this for the past 7 years. Um, and the what we focus a lot on controversial topics and kind of they're the meaty things to have a conversation about. But the goal is not to win or convince anybody. It's truly to understand how somebody feels about a topic, whatever it is. And out of that has developed understanding, a lot of friendships, respect, and a deeper sense of community. We kind of started them as an antidote to the polarization and loneliness that many of us feel. Each gathering is built around a core set of agreements: listening with curiosity, speaking from personal experience, and building understanding rather than trying to win. When these things happen, we hear many times that, people report back that, this is the first time they've had a real conversation in months. I remember one particular woman, she said, she wrote to us and said, I sat across the table from somebody who votes opposite from me, and I left feeling more connected to them than the people who I vote with. And it just really kind of struck us that we're doing something quite important here. So now, from the Petaluma Conversations, we expanded into Aqus Community gatherings. These were larger, curated events for people with shared interests and shared professions. Each one has the same kind of structure. We start off with a section of speed networking. Then we have a breakout groups, and then we have something called pass the mic at the end. And they're rather different from most mixers where you hang out beside the peanuts and hope to have a conversation with somebody. These are intentional. We want to have as many conversations and create as many connections as possible. So the speed networking is quite interesting. I'll get on the microphone and ask everybody to gather into groups of three people, two of whom you've never met. And the person with the darkest eyes starts, and you've got a minute and 30 seconds to tell the other two people about yourself, why you're here, what your interest is in the topic of the evening. And 4.5 minutes later, I'll break that group up, and you go find two other people that you've never met before, and you rinse and repeat the whole kind of process. That lasts about 45 minutes, and really it's a wonderful way for people to get connected with as many people as possible. Now that thing about the person with the darkest eyes starts, it's intentionally a tiny little bit awkward, but it works like magic because really kind of once you've looked into the eyes of somebody, you have a connection there. You have that human connection, and it's interesting. After all of these events, at least one or two or three, in some cases, introverts come up to me and thank me for gently encouraging them that you get into the conversation. They generally get so much out of that that Getting over that fear of initially kind of having a conversation with somebody you've never met or looking at somebody in the eyes, it's overcome, and it's just kind of wonderful to see that those connections being made. The second part of that event is where we have subject matter experts. We've got maybe 5 or 10 groups of chairs ready for that hosted conversation where a subject matter expert will host a conversation with people who are interested in that particular aspect of that topic and the evening. And so you'll spend another kind of half an hour, 45 minutes getting into a deeper conversation with the other people there and also the subject matter expert. And this year we've hosted quite a few of these larger gatherings. They're generally between 100 and 200 people. We started this year off with the nonprofit night where everybody in town who's involved in nonprofit world just gets together, and in many cases they're meeting each other for the very first time. We did a great one for writers. We called it the written word, for writers, editors, publishers, illustrators, anybody who's involved in the business of writing. And again, to see these connections that were made that weren't there before is wonderful. We do a really kind of fun one called Drinks with Shrinks, where we invite all the therapists and the people in the mental health industry to just gather. And that particular group is actually quite interesting because generally therapists have a relationship with their clients and they don't necessarily know all the other people in town who share their profession. And just to see the excitement of those people kind of meeting people who are, in some cases living around the corner from them, and they're sharing that profession. And then of course out of that comes the ability to refer to each other, clients that might need different kind of therapy or different kind of mental health professionals. Another one we did is for film and video professionals. You get all the industry professionals in that field, get them all together. You do this, and out of that comes the most amazing things. I still hear years and years later that because of that film and video event that we did 6 or 7 years ago, we now have a full-length feature movie or a documentary or a job or whatever it is that happens out of the connection that wasn't there before. We do a couple of other ones. We do the artists and creatives. And what drives me to do this is every time, people leave these events saying, I had wonderful conversations I didn't expect with people that I would never have met. And it's all of these gatherings are creating connections that really wouldn't have been there otherwise. And so most of our larger Aqus gatherings um, started with a similar group of similarly inclined people at Aqus Café. Now, of course, not everybody has got a cafe, and I'm lucky enough to own Aqus Café, so I kind of use that as my experimental sandbox. And, seeing what works and seeing what doesn't work. If it works, we'll expand it into larger groups and larger events like the ones you're seeing here. Um, Recently, we've been having some wonderful successes on the kind of the community and social capital building in these community dinners. This is where we gather people, it could be Italian speakers, retired educators, blacksmiths, Camino walkers, local historians, any kind of subject that will gather people around a table. Now we do these kind of 3 times a week, and we move all the tables in the cafe into one big long table. I'll back up a little bit. Pre-COVID, we used to have music 5 nights a week. And although I love music and it does gather people, it doesn't start conversations. And so after COVID, I was kind of thinking to myself, well, and COVID has affected us all. I'm much more likely to, I'm a gregarious kind of guy who likes to go out and socialize a lot. But I noticed my own personality had changed. And we are becoming a more isolated society in general. And my belief is that we have to actively kind of fight against that and do something to stop us becoming more isolated and more siloed. Um, so after COVID, I kind of thought, well, um, music, yes, it gathers people, it doesn't start conversations. Let's invent something different. And so out of that, on midweek, we do these community gatherings, these community dinners. And they're very casual affairs. You can come in, you can have a cup of coffee, or you can buy a salad and a sandwich and a three-course meal and a bottle of wine if you want, or you can just come in and have a glass of water. But the most important thing is that you sit down on a table, big long table, you get a little name tag, and you're invited to move place every 30 minutes on the half hour. And people really do this because they understand that what they're doing here is creating connections, creating, having conversations with people that they've never met before, and out of that will come, who knows what will come out of that. It's quite interesting to see. Obviously, some of the popular languages, we've had, 30 or 40 people sitting at one big long table. Um, but it's the interesting ones, the smaller ones that actually I find very interesting. Just last week, we had a community dinner for Greek speakers. And it was fascinating, wonderful to see this group of people speaking Greek in this cafe in Northern California. Most of them had lived in Petaluma for 20 something years, and nobody had any idea that there were other Greek speakers in town. And just to see the joy and excitement of these people who had met each other for the first time is just, it's quite wonderful to see. Another one of our conversation or of our community dinners really had an effect on me was the Peace Corps volunteer dinner, where I overheard a conversation between a 26-year-old and an 82-year-old. They had served in the same country, but 50 years apart. And to see the joy and excitement in that conversation, they were speaking about similar things that they experienced and had been to the similar part of, I think it was Honduras. But just to kind of see that connection form was just quite wonderful. So we've had community dinners for, as I mentioned, electricians and blacksmiths and woodworkers, where there's no guild hall for these professions, and now they're suddenly in conversation, for the first time. It's wonderful to see. What we have been doing recently, actually, is something that I'm super excited about, is these street-based community dinners, where we'll invite everybody who lives on your street. And that again produces amazing results. People come in, they'll sit beside people, and I overhear these kind of conversations like they're kind of looking at each other and going, "Aren't you the person who lives a block up and with that nice blue awning?" Or "Aren't you the person who walks by my house every day with their dog?" And neighbors are meeting each other and having the very first conversation sometimes. These are, of course, people that will hopefully see each other when they're putting the trash out next week, or walking their dog, or gardening in their front yard. And hopefully, this will lead to a second or a third conversation. Now, why I'm focused on these is not just because it gets people together, but I recently read a FEMA study, that's the Federal Emergency Management Authority in the United States, that did a study a few years ago, and they figured out that the, the study kind of said, asked people what are the things that make a successful outcome from a disaster, be it a fire, a flood, or earthquake. What is it that makes your likelihood of coming out of that um, alive, or some kind of successful, is not equipment, although equipment is important. It's your connection with your neighbor. It's your hyper-local social capital that makes the difference. And that's exactly why we at Aqus Community were working to build stronger, more connected neighborhoods. Um, Another project that we're super, super proud of is this thing called Cool Petaluma. That's COOL, Cool Petaluma. It's an environmental action organization that we co-founded under the umbrella of Aqus Community Foundation. We started this just after COVID, and it came through a challenge grant that went out to about 40 cities in California. And three cities received them: LA, Irvine, and Petaluma. We were absolutely delighted to be one of the recipients. But what makes Cool Petaluma different as a climate action organization? We don't start with calculating your carbon footprint. It really starts with connection and caring. We didn't launch this with a list of energy upgrades and recycling tips. We began by asking a few simple but powerful questions. Do you know your neighbors? Do they know you? Would you feel comfortable knocking on their door in case of an emergency or a crisis? The need for this it became painfully clear during the devastating fires of our neighboring city up north, about 20 miles north of Santa Rosa, where a lot of pets died because their neighbors, they were away, they left their pets at home. Their neighbors didn't know that they had pets. They didn't even know the neighbors. They didn't have a telephone number or a cell number to call. And even if they knew they had their pets, would they feel comfortable breaking a window to let the dog out if the owners are away? So these kinds of things is the cost of having a disconnected world. So let me back up a little bit and tell you how Cool Petaluma works. So if you volunteer as a block leader with Cool Petaluma, we will help you gather your nearest 5 or 10 neighbors into a series of gatherings. Now, the first two of these gatherings are community building and emergency preparedness, something that we are all concerned with. It starts with step one, you basically going and knocking on your neighbor's door and inviting them to a gathering in your front yard or your backyard. Um, Now, that one gesture can be transformative. And in some cases, if you, I mean, I hear stories about it all the time, people have lived on their street for 20 years, and then they go through this Cool Petaluma program. The entire street looks completely different because you know Frank and you know Susie and you know Francis at the end of the corner is a doctor, and Paul over there is a contractor that could help in case of emergency, and then you know that this person you can borrow a ladder from, and that person you can might help create a neighborhood emergency plan. The Cool Petaluma organizes around 6 themes: community building, emergency prep, consumption, transportation, building, and nature. But really, these are just the key points. The real work happens at the kitchen table or at a block party that one of our volunteers will host. So since we launched, we've had about 250 block leaders across Petaluma, and this is truly a people-powered movement. Climate action that uses the power of social capital to do something for the planet. And it's working, and it's joyful, and it's local, and it's about relationships, and that's why it works. And it's personal. Now, Cool Petaluma isn't just a program, really. It's a community-powered solution to a global challenge. And we see it working in Petaluma, and we see it working really, really well. And we're super proud of that. We help people with training. That's me giving a training session. That's a friend of mine who's gathered all his neighbors to go over what are we going to do in emergencies. And you see all those dots represent all the various block leaders all over Petaluma. It's quite a phenomenal program that we're actually ready to share with other people as well. Um, so I'm going to finish by talking about something that I started about 2 years ago called the Joiners Movement. It hit me a few years ago while reflecting on kind of loneliness and our deepening political divide, not just in the United States, but worldwide. That what struck me is we've stopped gathering. Now, much of this, of course, was because of COVID. But it wasn't too long ago that it was quite normal for everybody to attend a weekly service. Now, it could have been in a church or a synagogue or a mosque or some other religious organization, or it could have been a Moose Lodge meeting or a Rotary breakfast or maybe a potluck dinner. We used to sit in pews together with people we didn't agree with. We prayed and we knelt together with people who voted opposite to us. And despite our differences, there was respect because we belonged to something together. Now, it's absolutely not surprising to me that we're so politically divided. We never really get a chance to rub elbows with people we don't agree with. We're siloing ourselves into, socially, culturally, and politically, we're siloing ourselves into groups of people who we already agree with. So it's not surprising that we never get a chance to even have a conversation with somebody we disagree with. Today we're much more likely to be a member of Amazon and Spotify. and we feel the loss. We feel what's going on in the world. And we say, things aren't quite like what they used to be. And, we shrug our shoulders and we press play on another Netflix episode, and that's it. What are we going to do? But I think it doesn't have to be like that. Rebuilding starts with one simple act, and it's just showing up again. What if we could rebuild our communities from the inside out by joining something? Not just virtually, not passively, not online, but physically, locally, and with other people in the room. So, 2 years ago, I made a personal commitment to myself to join one membership organization, an in person membership organization, per year until 2030. As I said, this started 2 years ago when I joined the Herman Sons Hall. It was an organization started about 150 years ago to help German-speaking immigrants find their feet in the United States. And I've met some incredibly interesting people there and have developed some great friendships there. The last year I joined something called the Petaluma Danish Soldiers Club. It's another group that really kind of keeps tradition, uh, uh, keeps it alive. Now, I'm neither a Danish nor a soldier, but I look at these organizations as containers of community. I felt welcomed there, and again, I've developed some wonderful friendships there. And a few weeks ago, I decided that this year my membership organization was going to be the Rotary Club. Very traditional, but in light of the fact that they've got 1.2 million members worldwide, I kind of thought to myself, they've got power, they know what they're doing. And one of the aspects that I really like about the Rotary is that when they decide to do something, it gets done. So why am I joining? Um, Now, these organizations, many of them have aging rosters and dwindling numbers, and um, but they all hold something we cannot afford to lose. It's places where people gather of different ages, beliefs, and backgrounds are showing up and working side by side. These clubs have kitchens and long-standing values, and they have halls and kitchens and long-standing values of service, connection, mutual aid. But now, rejoining is not something new. Most of us, I think, here have seen the film Join or Die. I organized the screening of this really important film 3 times earlier this year in Petaluma, each time to a sold-out crowd. At one of the screenings, the first one you see here, we had 16 different membership organizations tabling at the event so that so members of the public could, have conversations with people and find out, well, what do they do? And a lot of times people had never heard of these organizations. Um, it was met with a resounding absolutely yes. People are understanding what this is about. They're understanding that we are becoming a more isolated and divided uh, country, and this is something that we can do together. So my invitation to everybody listening is to just join one organization per year. It could be the Moose or the Rotary or the Lions, a garden club, a choir, anything at all that gathers people together in real life and in real time. Join so that other people will see. Join to set an example. If enough of us take this step, 5 clubs in 5 years, we could revitalize hundreds of community institutions across this country and indeed across the world. And we might just rediscover what it means to be part of something. So thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. We're going to open up for Q&A at the moment, and happy to talk about this community building that we've been doing in Petaluma for the past 25 years through these great organizations that we've started.
Wonderful, John. So inspiring, all of the work that you're doing in Petaluma, and it's just so great to see how we can create connection in community. I think so many of us see, like you're describing, the pattern that's moving towards disconnection and increasingly people being isolated, and to be able to reverse that and put in place these kinds of initiatives is just fantastic to see. And I think it's something that we can take inspiration from and lessons and and ideas, and hopefully we can apply this throughout communities, like you said, all over the world. So we've got lots of comments and questions coming up in the discussion, so we'll get to them. As we go through this process, we've got quite a few people in the room. So if you could either raise your hand, which you'll find under the React button in Zoom, or alternatively post in the chat. And if you, either way, if I call upon you, if you could unmute yourself to ask the question yourself, or if you're not in a position to do so, I'll happily read the question on your behalf. But just let me know if you'd like me to read it out for you. So I think a lot of the questions coming through, John, are about I guess the challenges of doing this and what so often is a climate or a context of disconnection and fear and polarization, like you described, and how you go about overcoming those. Like you described in one of the initiatives, you described actively talking about setting an environment of active listening and encouraging people to engage in that kind of respect of the other person's perspectives that might start to foster the potential for these kind of conversations to occur. But I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you deliberately go about trying to set that environment within the initiatives that you create to overcome some of those barriers, and what some of those barriers are specifically in Petaluma, and what remaining challenges there are that you're not able to overcome by creating that kind of environment that might be constructive.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Well, I didn't present to you all of the things that didn't work, obviously. And it really is a matter of kind of throwing things on the wall, seeing what sticks. I remember actually that first community crawl that I hosted some 25 years ago. There was fear. There was, well, what happens if nobody shows up? The Petaluma conversations. What happens if nobody shows up to these things? It is a matter of overcoming your own personal fear and just going and doing these things. I mean, nothing will happen if we stay at home watching television. Nothing will happen if we don't put ourselves out there to join an organization. Nothing will happen if we don't push our own envelopes. We really are experiencing something that is quite unnerving, in our in society in general. And so what's happening now, it's pretty awful what's going on in the world, but it's also inviting us to think differently and to do things that we really would never have done before, maybe never have had the courage to do before. And when we see things that are just so awful going on there, that why not throw something at the wall and see what happens. That disconnection that we're feeling, uh, in some cases there might be some intentionality about it. Actually, in that film Join or Die, there was references to, after the 60s there were some kind of indications that revolutionary idea was, to a certain degree, squashed a little bit. And now I think maybe is the time for doing something that we haven't done before. And really, that is, I mean, one of the things mentioned in the Cool Petaluma program, that people have to go and knock on the doors of their neighbors. And that can be pretty nearly embarrassing, because if you live beside somebody that you don't know their name and you've lived beside them for 20 years, it's kind of embarrassing to go knock on their door. We should know our neighbors much better. I tell stories of when I was a kid, my mom sending me across the street to Mrs. What was her name, Mrs. Healy, for a stick of butter she was baking and she didn't have any. So yeah, little Johnny, run across the road and get some butter. We don't do that anymore. Yet I imagine, and I posit that if one of our neighbors did that, say, hey, I'm baking, can I have a cup of flour? First of all, we'd feel, I think, really proud that we knew that neighbor that well, that they would trust us to do that kind of a thing. I think we've all been divided, and I don't know why or wherefore, but I know that we need to get reconnected.
Yeah, for sure. So the question came through on the YouTube stream from Chandan, and asking about what the misconceptions are when you first ask people to basically build their social capital. But I imagine you probably don't use the term social capital with these initiatives. You actually encourage people to build community, build relationships. But do you?
I use the term both. 20 years ago, that article that you saw posted, that was the headline was social capital, and that was written in 2005. And people didn't understand what it was. They kind of thought it was some kind of real capital, or what are we investing in, and that kind of thing. So I use the word community nearly kind of interchangeably, depending who I'm speaking with in conversation. The idea of social capital, it's something that is getting more talked about, not just in academic fields. It is at city levels. People are understanding. At some stage, I think most cities will have a director of social capital. I hope they do. I mean, I think some of the more progressive cities absolutely will. It's not just, I mean, community building doesn't really happen by itself. I mean, if you build a park and tennis courts and stuff like that, yeah, to a certain degree, but active community building it's an important thing to do. And it's one of those things that it pays off in there's a term, it pays off in just a multitude of the energy that you put in comes back 100-fold. And that's Petaluma to a certain degree is like it is because of the work that we've been doing. It's not just me, there's a whole bunch of people who understood this idea of community building 20 something years ago. And I think people find when they move to Petaluma, unfortunately, it's become very popular. House prices have shot up, so nobody can afford to live here anymore. But it is one of those things that the sense of community is palpable here. You walk down the street, people do say hello. You're walking in a park, people do say hello. There is the natural, you trust people first here rather than the other way around. And it's some of it is indeed because of the work that we've been doing here.
Yeah, I think it's a perfect segue into the next question in the chat. Feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to, and also please correct my pronunciation of your name if it's incorrect. But Lopa Saxena asks about building social capital requires an investment of time, material, and financial resources, and very often community champions, of course, such as yourself and the others who you mentioned. So how is this structured and mobilized in the specific context that you're talking about today?
Um, So the different things require obviously different inputs. The crawl idea that I had 25 years ago, it was a lot of fun. And people it did take some time organizing these things and scheduling and meeting with all the different places that we go to did take a lot of time to do. But I knew that I was going to be living in Petaluma for the rest of my life. I was invested in it. And doing those kind of things had an effect on where I lived and the community. Obviously, things like the Aqus Café, it's my cafe. I do get, it's partnership. I own half of the cafe. Aqus Community Foundation, we do a lot, those Petaluma conversations. Nobody pays us for the Petaluma conversations, yet they have huge effect on the community. We've had just before the last election, we had one of the particular topics we talked about was again a very controversial thing that's going to be happening in Petaluma. So it's a hotel that has again divided the nation, sorry, divided the town. And it was important to have conversations about that. And we had about 35, 40 people attending these conversations that they had never had conversation about this hotel before. And so how do we fund that? Well, by donations. Aqus Community Foundation is a membership organization that we would love everybody in the world to join. But you're absolutely right. Building social capital does require money. But I really think that it's the kind of thing that it's money well spent. It's money that you invest in creating a nice place to live. It's also kind of, as we all know that social capital translates into real capital. If you've got a community with the high social capital, people will want to live there. People will want to have schools there. People will want to start businesses there. So there is a direct translation from social capital into real capital. So for me, it's kind of like, well, if you invest in social capital, the returns will come tenfold, or if not 100-fold. So I always kind of think of looking at some of the towns, just a couple of towns not too far away from where I live here, of kind of like, well, shouldn't we be running some of these programs there to help connect people there? And then, it's not as though there's kind of because this person is connected with the next person, you can see that the direct result happening out of that. People ask, why am I'm not in the film and video business, but if I know that everybody in my town who's in the film and video business is connected, has built trust and built a rapport with each other, that will affect other things. That will affect day-to-day life. If I know everybody who's involved in the nonprofit world, if they all know each other, then that has an effect on the entire community as a whole. So it's not just my industry. It's everybody's industry. Everybody should be a lot more connected than they are at the moment, and we're having and it's a lot of fun. I mean, that's one of the things that we have to always remember when we're creating something, building social capital. It sounds a little dry, but it doesn't have to be. Make it fun. Make it something that people want to go to. All of these events that we do, they are super fun. People come out of these things just jazzed and excited about the people that they've met and about the opportunities that have been presented and facilitated for them. And so it doesn't have to be something that is mundane or boring. Make it fun, but it does
Absolutely.
cost money.
Absolutely. For all of these, if you've asked a question, of course, feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to follow up with anything else as we go along. I think the acknowledgement of this, like you're saying, like every city should have like somebody who's responsible for social capital or helps to build it within the community. And I think that's being acknowledged increasingly. Like in the United States now, Aaron Hurst and their team is pushing the idea of a chamber of connection in every place where there's a chamber of commerce. There should be a chamber of connection and the
Hmm.
foundation for social connection. I think this is increasingly, like you're saying from the beginning, like this is increasingly being acknowledged, and the return on investment, if you like, if it needed to come down to that, but the return on investment is extremely strong. You make the
Yes.
investment, enormous and wonderful and fantastic things happen across a very broad range of social outcomes. It's not,
Yeah.
like you said, it's not just about disaster resilience. It's about public health. It's about so many other things that create benefits within the community.
Yeah.
It's so exciting, as you can tell. I just love all of this. So let's move on. There's quite a few more comments and questions in the chat. So let's see if we can get to them. Luigi says, I represent a little non-profit association dealing with mental health prevention in southeast of Italy. I agree that solitude is one of the darkest beasts in Italy. It is not important to improve the community and public life, but giving it a meaningful context. Thank you for your contribution. So it's not so much a question or a comment, but feel free to respond to that one.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting. The comment comes from Italy that reminds me of a program that we started last year called the Passeggiata, which we encouraged everybody. We've transformed it over to something. Passeggiata is a term, and correct me if I'm pronouncing it wrong. Uh, it basically means that after dinner you go for an after dinner walk. And it seems to be a tradition in Italy that everybody in the entire village goes for a walk, and you connect with your friends and your neighbors, and you see people that you might not have seen for since last week or something like that. We've changed it a little bit, and we're just launching something actually for the next 2 months here in Petaluma called the Wednesday Walk, where we're encouraging everybody to just at 6 o'clock every Wednesday, you leave your home and you walk to the nearest park. And kind of envision kind of everybody in Petaluma doing that. As you leave your front door and you look up and down the street, you see everybody exiting their homes and walking to the nearest park. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this. We should all know where our nearest park is, because that could be an emergency gathering spot. The most amazing things will happen and did happen. We know this happened. We launched the Passeggiata about 2 years ago. I don't think we did it last year, but we're relaunching it as the Wednesday walks. Amazing and interesting conversations will happen. If you live beside a park, walk around it 3 or 4 times, and for half an hour. You'll meet people that you would never have met before, and that's kind of the any kind of idea that we have that connects people, brings people into conversation. Even if it's just a small kind of hello, how are you, top of the morning to you, will go a long way. I always kind of say you can't have that second conversation unless you've had that first one. And engineering that first conversation is truly one of the most important things that Aqus Community Foundation is focused on. So thank you for reminding me of the Passeggiata.
Yeah, I love that idea of the Wednesday walk. And it makes me think, it sounds like Petaluma is a really quite a special kind of place. Over a long period of time, it's become quite different perhaps than other communities because of these kinds of initiatives that are connecting people. Have there been any uptake from, say, this, the city or the local council? I'm not sure what it's called in Petaluma. Are they changing in the way in which they actually implement policies to create spaces for community, to design more walkable neighborhoods, to provide more parks? Like, is there any sort of change in policy as a result
Oh,
of
oh,
what's happening within the community?
very much so. Yes. No. So Cool Petaluma works closely with the city of Petaluma, and we're getting great support for them. The city of Petaluma has it's called a blueprint for climate resilience, and we are working our way through that. It's climate resilience has a huge part of community building in it. Um, a resilient community has to have well-connected society. And so our city, I'm super delighted to be in the city and super delighted to have a city council like we do have that realizes this kind of thing. And so they are focused on things like bicycle paths, parks, recreating communities. And yeah, can't speak more highly about the city that we're living in. I'm not sure what happened first. But either way, it's happening, and super delighted. And as I mentioned, we haven't quite got a director of social capital yet,
Mhm.
but we will.
And that's often the way, isn't it? There's the different actors within society can play different roles. That there's a role there for government, there's a role for community leaders, there's a role for individuals to play in turning around the decline in social capital.
Yes, exactly. I mean, it's all partners. The large section of we have a huge section of nonprofit world here in Petaluma, and they're very much on board. They realize that, and especially they realize that when they come to our nonprofit gatherings, I'll speak about social capital because it's important that everybody knows about it. Everybody knows the value of community building, and they see it in action. They see it because they're at the nonprofit mixer and they've coming out of there all jazzed and excited about it. Our city, we're very involved with the emergency management team here in Petaluma. We're building out an NRG, a neighborhood response group team. And again, at the core of that is social capital. It's building connections, building community. That's why our Cool Petaluma program is so successful is because it's based on connections, it's based on recreating that community that we kind of look back and kind of say, oh yeah, things were better in the old days. Well, certain things were, certain things weren't. Let's take the good parts of what was better and recreate them. I think what's happened slowly over certainly in America, it's happened slowly, maybe over 30, 40 years, the social capital disintegrated. I saw it happen in Ireland very fast. We got our televisions, pretty much overnight back in the late 60s, I think it was. And I remember one particular thing. On Thursday nights, there was nobody. I was whatever 8 or 10 at the time. Thursday nights we got our television the latest on our whole street. But I remember Thursday nights there was nobody to play. Nobody. The streets were empty, and we kind of figured out that that's when Star Trek was on. And then something else happened on a Wednesday, and then the Wednesdays got emptied, and something else happened on a Friday, and then suddenly after a while the entire all the kids were inside watching television. And so that really kind of landed on me quite considerably because I kind of thought, well, where all first of all, where are all my friends? They're all watching television, and the commuting, and then the distrust, and television stoking up fears of your neighbors, and I think we're starting to realize that the effect that this is having on our physical and mental and just a spiritual well-being is something that we really need to actively take steps to basically counter these things and put joy and happiness back in there.
And are you still connected with what's happening in Ireland? Because there's a question in the chat there from Maureen asking about the difference between the United States and Ireland and whether you see any particular difference in the social capital in each of those countries.
Yes, I do. I mean, the pub culture uh, is still alive in Ireland. Now, a huge percentage of pubs have closed over the past 30 years in Ireland. My own family business closed down over COVID. But the need for pubs is still there. And what I always love about I'm going back to Ireland in about 4 weeks' time. Of course, the first thing I'm going to do is go down to my local pub and I'll meet everybody there. Now, the differences between, I think, Ireland and the United States is that there is, I think, more trust in people in Ireland. I think, I mean, I'm not really sure. I think in America, we're all desperately afraid of each other, mainly because we don't meet each other. At least in Ireland, you meet in the local pubs. Um, so, can I definitively say there's a huge difference between, there are some differences. Both have their values. But in terms of social capital, I think in America we're realizing how broken it is. In Ireland, I don't think they're realizing quite how broken it is either. Although there's a lot more of it that is slowly dissipating because of television, because of commuting, because of that pub culture is having issues, I think, at the moment. It's not as strong as it used to be. So I'll tell you in 4 weeks' time when I'm there.
And it seems like also a lot of the ability to socialize now is linked to the ability to spend money. And as inequality increases, it seems like a growing percentage of the community is unable to socialize in those ways if money is involved. And I see this quite strongly in the UK. I'm not sure if it's a reality, but there's a perception that a beer is now much more expensive than it used to be. And it's a barrier for people to be able to actually engage in those kinds of activities where they would have in the past engaged in social
Yes.
action.
Yeah, yeah, exactly that. And, part of our Wednesday walk initiative is also to encourage people to have picnics at local parks on Wednesday evenings. So, bring a book, bring a picnic, walk to your park, and have a free. There's no money involved. You got to eat a sandwich, you got to eat dinner anyway, so you might as well meet it with your friends. That initiative actually was sparked by, I was invited by somebody recently, about 4 weeks ago, to one of our local parks. I think she sent an email out to about 30 or 40 of her friends and said, "Hey, I'm going to be in this park at this time, and come and join me if you can." And maybe I think 10 or 12 people showed up, but for those 10 or 12 people, we all bought something to eat and something to share, and it was just a wonderful, free way of connecting with each other. And people brought stories, and it was just nice to reconnect. So that's kind of one of our other kind of ideas that we're launching is yes, reuse our public spaces that are free, and why not?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've still got a few more comments and questions in the chat to work our way through. We've also still got a little bit of time, so feel free to get more in there. And of course, feel free to unmute yourself or to raise your hand. We'd certainly love to hear other voices in this as well. So we'll come to Rosalie in a minute. We'll go to Lopar's question in the chat first, which is something I've been thinking about as well. Is that social capital can be exclusionary, so benefiting some groups while marginalizing others. So interested in, I guess, whether or not you're getting fairly representative in participation from everyone in the community, or whether maybe there's some groups within the Petaluma community who are being somehow left out or not included as much as they could be.
Um, there's always, I mean, whenever you form a group, there's always people who are not in the group. So Italian speakers, I can't go to the Italian speaking group. But we're always looking for groups of people, and as I mentioned earlier, it's the smaller groups, the tinier groups of people who are just interested in maybe you're writing Russian poetry. Get all the Russian poets into one conversation. So we do obviously kind of think of things that will have a broader range and to as many people as possible. However, you can counteract that by saying, well, what if you wanted to get all the Russian poets or the Taiwanese whatevers together? By definition, when you start a conversation with a group of people, there are people who will feel in the group and people who feel out of the group. And I don't know whether this is a solution for that other than learning Italian or Russian or whatever. I'm not sure. Maybe I could help. Let's delve down into that question a little bit more because yes, we don't want to feel left out, but we also kind of have to maybe opt into these groups ourselves. And if somebody comes to me with an idea of, "Hey John, can we have a community dinner based on this whatever?" I don't think I've ever said no to anything at all. Obviously there's probably a couple of things I have said no to, but because they'd just been either too outlandish or doesn't fit with the context of the cafe or their for some other reasons. So I'm not sure that I'm answering the question correctly.
Well, I think you're saying nobody really is excluded. Everyone is welcome to take part in the events that you have, and you'll always put on events that will include more and more people. But perhaps whether or not there's exclusion occurring is really the attitude of the groups that are forming. That if the group sees themselves as being exclusionary, that they're in the group and others are not in the group, and they tend to dehumanize or other the people who are not in the group, then you get those
Right.
negative consequences of it. But it sounds like
Yeah.
that's not really happening in Petaluma so much.
I have no, I don't think so at all. I mean, if somebody wants to form a group, let's form a group. I mean, that's why people feel comfortable in groups. And if on our calendar, and you can go to aquascafe.com right now and have a look at the groups that we have there. If there's something you're interested in that we don't have, well, let's have a conversation and let's make it happen.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're already being quite purposeful and deliberate about trying to identify members of the community who may not already be included. But I think it's always, to that point, it's always an important question to ask yourself is anybody being left out here?
Yes.
And it can be for all sorts of different reasons. Like just because there's an invite to take part doesn't mean that people are going to some members of community are going to necessarily feel like they can for many different reasons.
Yeah, exactly that.
So
I
we
mean,
better
one
get
of
to
the things.
Brad. Sorry, go
Sorry.
ahead.
Yeah, no, no, just kind of going back to that group of people, if we invite everybody who lives on your street, well, that's, how inclusionary can you get to, if somebody comes to me with can we have a community dinner for my street? Absolutely. Sure. Why not?
Yeah. So we better get to Brad first before we move to Rosalie. And then there's something from Stephanie. And then I see also Brad's inviting Deb Fox, who is here. If you would like to have something to say, you're welcome to as well. But let's get to Brad's first before we move to Rosalie. So Brad says, what are your thoughts about the management of the interplay of interpersonal and institutional connections, particularly related to political and religious affiliations?
Oh gosh, okay. Um, well, it's interesting. I've not being religious or part of a religious organization for the past many years, should I say. But also kind of looking at religious organizations as containers of community or something that I guess I've had a change of mind about recently. Uh, that yes, they do contain community. They do contain, it's an opt-in kind of group that as long as there's, as you refer to, it's not othering and making people feel unwelcome and not part of that group. Um, all of these groups and all of these institutions and religious organizations, they perform something, a way of gathering people together in conversation to have community together, to be in community with people is hugely powerful. Now, you can always kind of say, well, that religious organization or that institution or this group are, uh, not what they should be, or they're doing something nefarious. Obviously, I don't want to encourage anything like that. So maybe again, I think I'm not quite answering that question. It was a little kind of academic for me, to be quite honest.
Sure, sure thing.
Maybe translate it into
Yeah, let's move on. We're starting to run a little bit short on time, and I'm aware there's still probably a lot to cover. So Rosalie, would you like to unmute yourself and feel free to ask a question or make a comment? Rosalie may have just stepped away for a moment, so maybe we can get to the comment from Stephanie first before we come back. So Stephanie says, amazing presentation and discussion. Thank you so much. Reminds me of a great read from about 10 years ago called The Vanishing Neighbor by Mark Durkelman. Have you read that book, John?
I haven't. No, sounds as though I'm making a note of it, and I imagine it's about exactly that, the vanishing neighbor, that we don't know our neighbors anymore. I'm different because we've got a Cool Petaluma program running on our street, so I pretty much know most of our neighbors here. But truth be told, most of us know our neighbors right beside us, maybe one over, but we don't know our neighbors four or five homes up. And it's a pity. I remember when I came to the United States first, I was about 18 at the time, and I was visiting some friends in Syracuse, New York, and it just seemed to be a tradition in New York, in Syracuse anyway, that the entire summer was block parties left, right, and center. You could hardly get to anywhere without bumping into a block party. And then when I immigrated to the United States, some when I was in my 30s, I was looking forward with anticipation to these block parties, and in California, they just don't happen. And I'm not sure whether they still happen in Syracuse or not, or whether it was just kind of a thing that happened in the 70s and 80s. But there's something that we're trying to encourage to happen, in Petaluma, and in fact, across the United States and pretty much everywhere, so that you get to know your neighbor. And it's not just a kind of a fun thing. We all realize that it's an emergency management thing. We should really know all our neighbors, even if it's, for whatever reason, but make it fun, and make it for the joy of meeting people.
And there does seem to be an enormous demand and interest in that. Like you were saying before, like, go across the street to get a cup of sugar or a tab of butter or something. I think most people would be like delighted with the opportunity to be able to help a neighbor and to get to know somebody. But perhaps what's changed in the last 50 years is that now some people wouldn't like that. That some people would be like, hang on, what are you doing here? And suspicious and fearful. And that probably stops a lot of us from actually going across the street and knocking on the door. Because while most people are probably going to love it and be, very open to it and delighted to help, others maybe aren't. And where I live in Brisbane, unfortunately, a lot of people sort of recoil from opening a conversation with a stranger. And it's actually really sad to see because it creates a barrier. And I think it may be as much as 50% of all the people I say hello to kind of go, well, why are you talking to me? And that then makes me kind of go, well, maybe I shouldn't be saying hello to people. But then I have to, of course, think, no, actually, I want to know my neighbors and get past that. But for other people, maybe they don't get past that. And that's kind of the barrier that we have now, I think, in a lot of communities. We have to get past that, the fact that
Yes.
some people are fearful and they don't want to engage.
Yes, yeah. That's one of the reasons I think why these street-based community dinners are so successful, is because you only get the people, the only people who come are the people who want to connect. The people who aren't the fearful people who, it's unfortunate, but if we keep on repeating these things, word will get around, and even to the most fearful person who, he'll start finding out about these community dinners, and eventually they'll come, and then eventually they'll have that block party on the physical block where they live. So that's my
Yeah.
my my goal, is get people to the cafe so they can meet each other for the first time, maybe build some trust, build some relationships, and then go and do it in your own block.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
So
that's
Rosalie, your hand's not raised anymore, but feel free to put it up again or to unmute yourself and to make a comment or a question, of course. If you're there, if you'd like to, of course.
Okay, I had to take a call. Thank you. So I'm really grateful for this, John, for you, and Tristan, from you. A couple of things. Right now, I've been copy editing a book about social capital for a woman who wrote her master's degree on it. So that's how I got even interested in the conversation and how I stumbled upon the Institute. So Tristan, thank you. John, I lived in Petaluma for decades, and I'll be going back there next week. So I hope to say hello to you over there at the cafe sometime or another.
Oh my
And we
gosh,
can have a little
absolutely.
a little social capital connection, right?
I
But
would
what I
love
bring
that,
is from
Rosalie.
Super. Well, what I bring is from my experience here in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. So here, this is a town that's known for being a place where a Civil War battle happened, and it was a turning point in the Civil War, and we saved the country. And except for who likes to come to Gettysburg, the town is small, but it's supported by millions of guests every year, visitors, people who come for the history. Now, the people who come
Yeah,
for the history might be of two minds, and they might be in a mind to meet someone else, or they might be in a mind to only meet people who are like themselves. And
yeah,
so this is
yeah,
something that it gets, kind of imbued into the town. For example, in the commerce, there are certain commercial outlets that cater to a Southern perspective, may I call it, or those that cater to a unionist perspective. And there are those that
yeah.
cater to Abraham Lincoln, he's my hero. That's why I'm here. um,
Wow,
so what we
wow.
so that's one thing here. So we have divisions around the history that people bring when they think of Gettysburg, when they think of Abraham Lincoln, when they think of the war. And maybe they had
Yes,
ancestors who actually fought here or who actually suffered here or died here. So it's
yeah,
emotionally laden, just
yes,
Gettysburg, right?
yeah, yes. I can
Then also
imagine.
we have when I lived in Petaluma, there was the obvious gap between the agricultural workers, shall we say, and the non. When I looked at the beautiful photos that you showed today, I said, yep, kind of looks
Yeah.
kind of homogeneous there. And there are a
Yes.
lot
Oh,
of
yeah. Very much
people
so.
here. Yeah, there are a lot of people here in the Gettysburg area. Adams County is a fruit basket. There are a lot of food
Yeah.
workers here, ag workers, all kinds of workers in this area who would not
Yeah.
be connected or have an opinion about the history, but
Yeah.
they're part of our community. How do we include them? How does Petaluma
Yeah.
include people of
Yes.
all professions, of all ways of life, languages,
Yeah.
colors, whatever? How does
Yeah.
that social capital really expand and not be homogeneous, as Lopa asked?
Sure. No, it's a matter of reaching out to various organizations and populations and groups. Cool Petaluma, we're working with an organization called Cafe Puente here in Petaluma that is it's a nonprofit organization that is it addresses the needs of the Spanish-speaking community. So yes, it does. I mean, that's what we want to do. We want to reach out to various organizations and people to help bridge divides. That's what the whole conversation, the Petaluma conversation, is about. It's about bridging political, social, economic, and all the divides that seem to permeate throughout our society. And they need to be. We need to invite people to sit around a table, have a conversation. We're much more likely where we are now because of our political divides to throw rocks at each other, metaphorical rocks and maybe sometimes real rocks. But uh, we should be having conversations, understanding each other
Yeah.
rather than trying to persuade people this, that, and the other. So absolutely, I do hear you, Rosalie, and we are doing as much as we can. You're absolutely right. Petaluma is very homogeneous. It's there's not a lot of diversity in Petaluma. I don't know how that happened. I've been here 30 years, but it's getting 30 years ago. It was very homogeneous. It's gotten a lot better since.
Mm.
But yeah, no, we do absolutely reach out. We want to reach out to organizations, people, to exactly do that and bridge those divides.
Love it.
It
I
And
sounds
really
like
applaud the
did you get my
creativity.
email? Take down my email and email me, Rosalie,
I,
and
I will.
let's have a cup of tea next week.
Will do.
and
I
every
really
community
applaud
of
the creativity that's showing up in your activities. It's really, really beautiful. It's inspiring here in Gettysburg. There are a lot of us who want to see how do we bring things together more.
Yeah.
So I invited a couple of friends of mine actually showed up on this event, and we'll see what we come up with.
Great.
And every community
Great.
has challenges, of course, and it sounds like Petaluma may have some different or lesser, perhaps, challenges. Not to diminish, of course, the amazing things that are being done in Petaluma, but if there's been a movement over the last couple of decades of this kind of community building happening, then of course it's going to be easier to build community than in a place that has more barriers, more distrust, more polarization perhaps than Petaluma has. But again, like what's working in Petaluma, we need to understand that and see if we can apply it in these other places, even if there are those kinds of challenges, and then just figure out ways to work around them and to break down those barriers that are stopping people from getting together and building community.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes, thank you.
absolutely. I mean, that's I mean, I'm an eternal optimist, and the good thing about what's happening now is we're realizing how bad it is, and the need to actively do something about it. And through empathy circles, through conversations, through getting together, through truly understanding each other, I think is first step in the right direction.
Absolutely. So Deb, you've been invited to comment if you would like to. Of course, there's no obligation for you if you don't want to, but feel free to unmute yourself if you would like.
Yeah, I'm just a big fan of John and the work that he does. So that's why I'm here. I have the privilege of being able to work with him professionally. So yeah, I'm the climate action manager for the city. So this is where this fits right in. And just was on a energy efficiency webinar yesterday talking about how to convert people to do energy efficiency, and all the research shows same thing. Your neighbors is who you're going to turn to more than Angie's List or any of the other, web-based things. It's you're going to ask your neighbor. And so behavior change comes from the people that you know. And that's really, you have to hear it from a trusted messenger before you're willing to do anything. And that's really how we're going to get people to care about the planet and realize we're in a climate crisis. So this is where working with John and Cool Petaluma at Aqus is just really essential for building that social capital, which I'm a big fan of. The other realm that falls in for me is this is all related to system thinking. You have to have the whole system involved in the building community, and that includes the nonprofits, the businesses, the government, the schools, and most importantly, what John does well, both at Aqus and at Cool Petaluma, is the residents. So that everyone falls into one of those categories. So it's a great way that he's able to really help us elevate the work that needs to get done.
Yeah, and perhaps a director of social capital at the city of Petaluma is not too far away.
Yep.
So we are now running a bit short on time. There's only a couple of minutes left. Brad did make a clarification about his question, specifically about the religious and political affiliation and whether those challenges and opportunities there to help to revitalize community in America. And what sort of engagement strategies that you're using in your social capital building may help within those religious and political contexts, which tend to be very in-group focused with negative out-group effects. There's a tendency with both of those, I think, at times at least, to create negative out-group effects, and how the kind of strategies that you're using to build community might be helpful perhaps in those sort of contexts as well.
Yeah, one of the things we've actually got planned is one of these community dinners for faith-based leaders to see, well, who wants to come to the table to just, there's no agenda, it's just have a conversation, get to know each other for starters, have that first conversation. I think a lot of times we have kind of prejudged people and prejudged organization and prejudged faith-based organizations before we've even had a conversation with the person involved. And at the local level is really where I want to spend most of my time. It's because why the local? Well, it's because I interact locally. I am locally. I'm physically here, and that's why I think if I could encourage everybody to really just care a lot more about their physical, where they are in place, the organizations, the people that they meet, the organizations that they're part of, be it religious or non-religious. It's really the local is where it's all really matters and where you can really affect change. Can I influence what a religious organization or other organizations doing? Not really, not without, I get a lot of people. I remember when we were doing the Moose Lodge and some of these other organizations, the people would fold their arms and kind of say, well, I'm not going to join that organization unless they do this, that, and XYZ. Well, you can wait forever. Don't hold your breath because that organization might not change. The only way of affecting change, well, there's many ways, but one way of affecting change is by joining that organization. I always remember when trying to get people to join the Moose Lodge, people say, no, I'm not going to join the Moose Lodge. When you join an organization, you kind of assimilate and then you have to, be part of that. They have one mission. But I always kind of said, well, when you join an organization, that organization becomes just a little bit more like you. And so, when you enter a room, you change the energy in the room. When you enter into an organization, be it a religious or non-religious, you change the energy. You change by participating. You change the organization. You might change the mission statement. You might change whatever it is that you wanted to have it change from the outside. So that's I guess my recommendation to everybody is just join something.
Wonderful, John. It's a timely reminder to all of us that we can have an impact, even if it seems small. The ripples go out throughout our communities and our society, and we can make a difference, even if it doesn't seem like it's a big difference.
Oh yeah, very much so.
So thanks, everyone. We've run out of time, so let's wrap it up there. Our webinar series doesn't have a webinar next week, but the following week we have a wonderful presentation by Professor Jess Schiller looking at out of crisis comes resilience, how community schools have the potential to generate social capital. Thanks again, John. Really appreciate it. It's been fascinating and inspiring, everything that you're doing. As I mentioned in the chat, feel free to stay online for a few minutes if you'd like to for some informal discussion after we finish the recording, which I'll do now.